Hello everyone, welcome to One I Am YouTube channel. So today for the first time we are going to show you an end-to-end demo of financial grade API security. So before I start with the video, let me remind you of what is coming out of WSO2 Identity Server 7 release. So in this release we get optimized developer experience, business to business organization management, financial grade API security and unified developer experience. So as you can see in this quadrant, financial grade API security is one of key achievements in this Identity Server 7 release. Now let's see how financial grade API security came into picture. So for this we need to go back to 2018 where the emergence of PSD2 in European Economic Area and open banking in UK as well. In 2020 in Australian region they had the consumer data rights, so which introduced open bank to Australian region as well. So what open banking means is basically it opened up the payment services to third party providers through APIs. So this was done to increase the competition and innovation in the fintech industry. So as you can see, so when banks opened up their APIs, strong security became a crucial requirement. So during this time, they had OpenID Connect and Auth 2.0, but these specification did not mandate strong security features, which led to interoperability issues and security considerations as well. So due to this, OpenID Foundation came up with FAPI 1.0 specification in 2021. So what it did was it mandated the strong security features of Auth 2.0 and OpenID Connect. So that's kind of the summary how financial grade API security came into picture. Now after release of FAPI 1.0, it does not isolate to financial domain. So you can use this specification to other domains such as food industry or healthcare or any industry where you need extra layer of security in your APIs. Now let's see what are the main building blocks of FAPI. So we have push authorization request, we call it PA, and private key JWT, request object, JARM request, and mutual TLS. So in our previous videos, we covered each of these topics separately and we went into in-depth explanation of these concepts as well. So please go and watch these videos to get a better understanding on what each of these topics means. Now let's jump into this diagram and see how FAPI flow works. So we have our usual setup. We have the end user, API client, and the API server. So first we are going to make an API request with enforcing request object to authorization server. So when we enforce the request object, it protects the integrity of our authorization request. Then the authorization server is going to send us a authorization response using the hybrid or JARM method. So by using hybrid or JARM method, it's going to protect the integrity of the authorization response as well. So once we receive the authorization response, we can use that authorization code to make the token request over a mutual TLS connection. So we are going to use a public certificate and a private key to establish this mutual TLS connection. Then the authorization server going to send us the token response with a certificate bound access token. So at the end of this video, we are going to talk about what is certificate bound access token. So stay tuned for that. Once we receive our token response, we can use our certificate bound access token to make API calls to the resource server over a mutual TLS connection. So that's kind of an overview of how FAPI flow works. Now let's get into the identity server and see financial grade API security in action. Alright, so I have logged into my identity server console now. So I have already created a FAPI compliant app, but let me show you how you can create one as well. So you need to go to create application and you can select standard based application, and you can give a name for this. So I'm going to name this FAPI, and you just need to tick the FAPI compliant application. So I have already created one. Let me go inside of it and show you guys the setup. So important things to note here is, so I have allowed code grant type here, and I have put my authorized redirect URL, which is localhost 3000. And so in this demo, we are going to be using PKCE as well. So let me make it mandatory. So it's not mandatory when you are using FAPI, but to make your request more secure, you can use PKCE as well. So let's use it, right? So I'm going to hit mandatory, and I'm going to hit update. So if you go down, and when you come to client authentication, so when your application is financial grade API security compliant, the only authentication methods that are supported is mutual TLS and private key JWT. So we're going to be using mutual TLS for our client authentication. So I have selected that here. And also in this demo, you can use PAR request. So before your authorization request, we can send a back channel request to authenticate our client. So I'm going to make this mandatory as well for this demo. So we have a complete financial grade API security setup with all its cool features. All right. And so when you come to this token binding type, so we are not allowed to select by default. Our token binding type going to be certificate. So our token going to have our public certificate hash bind to that. All right. So the last thing to note is when you come down to certificate, so I have imported my public certificate here. So if you want to know how to generate this public certificate, you can go and watch our private key JWT video. So we have done the complete setup there. We generated the public certificate, the private key, and also imported that certificate to our client application in that video as well. Alright, so we are all set. Now we need to try out FAPI. So let me go to this jwt.io website. So yeah. So this is going to be our request object that we are going to use to generate our JSON web token. So we're gonna pass this JSON web token in our PAR request. So let's take a look at our request object, right? So we have our client ID, so which is this one, and the redirect URL, the scope, which is going to be OpenID, and so since we have made PKCE mandatory, we have to put a code challenge here as well. So you can pass this code challenge in your authorization request, but for our convenience, let's pass the code challenge in the PAR request itself in the request object. So to generate this code challenge, let's go to this online PKCE generator. So let's generate a code verifier first. Then let's hit generate code challenge. So I'm going to copy this value and paste it here. All right. And also we need to set our not before time and expiry time. So let's use this website. So I'm going to refresh it to get the current epoch time. So I'm going to make it the not before time. And for expiry, I'm going to just add 1 hour to this time and generate the timestamp. So let's put it here as well. Also, to add a signature to this JSON web token, I have imported my public certificate and the private key here as well. So our algorithm is going to be PS256. Now let's copy this JSON web token and hit our push authorization request. So in our PAR request, we are going to pass the client ID, and in the request parameter, we are going to pass our JSON web token. So let me paste here. And when you go to authorization, so you can see we are not using any authorization mechanism here, right? So so how the authorization is happening is basically through mutual TLS. So I have configured my mutual TLS in my Postman. So let me show you how to do that as well. So I have already done this, but let me show you how to do it. So you need to go to certificates in your settings and you need to add a certificate. So you need to put the host here. The port is going to be 9443 and you have to select the certificate file first. So it's going to be your public key and then the key file, which is the private key, and in the passphrase you need to put your certificate client's certificate store password. So after you enter that, you just need to hit add, then your mutual TLS setup is complete in your Postman. So I have already done this. I'm not going to click add, and yeah, now let's hit the PAR request, right? Alright, so we have received our request URI. So let me copy this request URI and let's take the notepad. So now we're going to use this request URI parameter and pass it in our authorization request. And I have set up my client ID here as well, right? So another important thing to note here is that when we are using PAR request, since we are not passing the JSON web token in the authorization request, our authorization request gets much smaller as well. So that's a advantage that we get when we are using a PAR request. So now let's hit our authorization request. Let me enter username and password. Alright, so we have received our response. Let me copy this. We have redirected and receive our response as a JSON web token. So why we receive a JSON web token? Because it's a JARM request, right? So when we are generating our JSON web token for PAR request, we put our response mode as JWT. So that's why we got the response as a JSON web token here, and we need to now decode this to get our authorization code. So I'm going to use JWT.io for this as well. So let me paste our JSON web token that we received. Alright, so this is our authorization code, and it has other parameters like issuer and expiry and session state, etc. So the important thing for us is the authorization code. Let's copy this and hit our token endpoint now. Right, so you need to set up these parameters, the code. So we need to paste our authorization code here, and the grant type is authorization code, scope is open ID, and other parameters like redirect URI, client ID. And since we are using PKCE, we need to provide the code verifier as well. So we have a code verifier here, right? So let me copy that and paste it here. Otherwise, if your code verifier is invalid, the PKCE validation going to fail, as you can see. So let's hit send. Alright, so we have received our access token, and so if you go to authorization here, so each of these communication happen over mutual TLS, and so we are not going to use any authorization like client ID, secret mechanism, anything. So all of our requests happen through our mutual TLS setup. Alright, so since we have received our access token, so before we validate, like do an introspection, let's take a quick look at what is a certificate bound access token. So let's talk a bit about certificate bound access token. So financial grade API security, why they have done this certificate bound access token is to mitigate any phishing attacks. So they have mentioned it about in the specification as well. So in this 8.3.5 section, they talk about access token phishing attacks. Key points to take are that they don't return the access token in the front channel, and the access token is bound to the client's TLS certificate. So what this means is, right, basically, so as we all know, in OAuth 2.0 implementation, we talk about bearer tokens. So what bearer tokens means is basically anyone with the bearer token, without proving the client's identity, we can call the resource server and request the desired resources, right? So how this differs when it comes to financial grade API security is, so with your access token you have to prove your identity with your client certificate as well. So the resource server going to check whether you are the correct owner of this access token. So that's what certificate bound access token means. So if you talk about a real world example also, right, to get a better understanding, so we can talk about like something like metro ticket and a airline boarding pass. So anyone with a metro ticket can board the plane, right? Sorry, not the plane, the train, right? So you can purchase the metro ticket and you can give it to your friend and he can then board the train. But that's not the case with airline boarding pass, right? So your airline boarding pass is going to be bound to your passport, and so you need to present your boarding pass and your passport both to board the airplane. So that's kind of an analogy of how this certificate bound access token works. So now let's take our access token that we received and do an introspection. So I'm going to use the introspection endpoint for this. Let's copy the access token first, and yeah. And authentication for this endpoint also happening over mutual TLS. Now let's hit send. Alright, so we have received our introspection response. So the important thing to note is here that this confirmation value. So this S256 hash value is basically our public certificate. So this is how our resource server is going to validate this access token, whether it's sent by the client. So it's going to decode this hash value and confirm the validity of the public certificate. So that's kind of an overview. What is a certificate bound access token and its use. Hope you guys got a clear understanding on this. And that's it for this video as well. So we have covered a lot in this video. We talk about financial grade API security, power request, JARM request, mutual TLS, and how the certificate bound access token works. So if you have any doubts, please leave a comment in the comment section. We will be happy to get back to you guys. And thank you for watching.